Hello crew, how's it going? My name's Ben and welcome aboard the Bonnie Rackham. This time we are on to episode 4 of season 1. I'm doing it a little bit different. I've got my notes on the computer screen, so my eyes will kind of be doing, I'll be looking a bit kind of boss-eyed, but I'm looking at my screen. My printer went, no, not today, we're not having it. So let's get to our first item of business.
First item.
So yeah, this one, it was pretty easy to go for a title with this one, I think, because I had to look up the word, but so yeah, the big main thing of this episode is where they clean the boat and, you know, do the boat, tip the boat and all that, and that is called careening. So I'm going to call this episode careening. It means to turn a ship on its side for cleaning, ultimately, but it's also one of those words. To careen is another meaning, and it means to move swiftly in an uncontrolled way. So, you know, that both of them, you know, it covers quite a lot going on in this episode. I did debate calling it Rotten Pigs, because obviously you got Silver with his pig and his rotten pig and all that kind of going on. And there is a lot of, there's a lot of shithousery in this episode going on with some rotten fellas. But no, I think careening suits it well. Does the job. So yeah, let's get straight into careening.
Next item.
So we have a change up in the writing, in who this was written by. This one is a solo one. This was written by Brad Caleb Kane and directed again by Sam Miller, who's done... Yeah, I think Sam Miller directed episode 2. So he's back again, and this is our first written by Brad Caleb Kane. So we start the episode with Gates doing a little bit of navigation in his cabin. And yeah, it's just a little moment, but we see he's still questioning himself, and he's still doubting himself a little bit. And he almost like mocks himself a little bit when he kind of goes, Captain Gates. Yeah, he's still not feeling this. And yeah, this episode in particular, this has some great ship foley, like great sounds, great creaking, you know, lots of great rope sounds, the sails billowing in the wind. There's a lot of good noises going on in this cabin. So Billy comes in and he joins the crew on deck for a meeting. He's getting things in order on the Walrus, ready for when he's going to become captain of the Ranger. So Gates brings up the fact that they are going to need a new quartermaster while he's away on the Ranger. He suggests Billy Bones, and that just gets a huge cheer. Billy very clearly loved, doesn't even need to be up for question. He's in. Billy is now quartermaster, at least temporarily. So Billy takes over the meeting and he brings up careening. You know, and there's some groans. You know, it doesn't start off well for him. There's groans to this. It's obviously not a fan favourite thing to do, but something they have to do. He starts to go over some other, you know, bits and pieces, and someone asks about the fuck tent. And then we meet Mr. de Groot, who is, I'm not sure his exact kind of job, but he seems like he's kind of part kind of navigator, kind of ship maintenance. He knows a bit about everything, I think, when it comes to running a ship, and he wants to find a more suitable beach for the task, because they're planning on doing it, I think, just around Nassau, I think, by the looks of it, where they are. Yeah, because that's where they are, isn't it? He says it's risky terrain here, basically. You know, he goes into it all a bit more. So, and at this point, it's where Flint reveals himself. You know, he's been kind of under the beams, you know, just listening in, taking it all in. And he reveals himself and airs his concerns about a possible delay. You know, says that it could cost them the gold. Every kind of minute counts, is what he's saying here. And of course, he only has to say, like, the gold word and the treasure word. And when it comes to a vote, it's pretty much unanimous, and they're all for Flint's plan to stay where they are and get a quick job done. It's only Morley that says nay, you know, a little bit later, a little bit delayed, and there's sort of a little bit of tension there between him, Flint, and Billy kind of notes it, but it's not taken any further. And then the fuck tent is brought up again, and Billy, very diplomatically saying, look, we've got a job to do here, you know, he says maybe just for this once we forgo the fuck tent. And he's just greeted with silence. And then, next shot we see, we're on the beach and a tent is being erected with 3 women just sat outside. So, yeah, he didn't win that one. So now we're still with the same crew, still with the Walrus crew, and Silver is presented with a dead pig, you know, on a, whatever you want to call it, on a spit. His original lie to get himself on board is in complete danger of falling apart here, because he obviously does not know how to cook a pig. De Groot airs his concerns again, as we see the ship kind of being pulled in by everyone. And Gates, you know, tells him to stop being such an old lady. So they've obviously got a little bit of camaraderie and kind of friendly bands going on. And De Groot asks Billy if he thinks it's a good idea. And Billy, he goes again, he backs Flint again, and he says the captain knows what he's doing. But his face says otherwise. Billy's looking concerned, and we will find out a little bit later, you know, why he's not quite speaking up yet. And now we get a flashback to the scene from the last episode, just that little snippet we got of him and Morley. He asked Mr. Morley who Mrs. Barlow is, and then Morley gives the details, and we kind of get a flashback in a flashback. Morley says a few years back, Flint had them hunting a merchant ship, the Maria Elaine, promised them riches they wouldn't know what to do with. He says that's Flint's gift, to always know kind of what to say and when to say it, to push them harder or further. He says they spent months hunting her and lost men taking her to a haul no way near what Flint promised. While Morley was searching below, he heard a man and a woman begging for their lives. Heard them offer riches to Flint in exchange for their life. Then he just heard screaming, and we see the flashback of a blooded Flint leaving the cabin. And we, of course, know exactly who he's talking about, why he's talking about, you know, but obviously all just complete mystery and, wow, what went down at this point. But when they came ashore, he sees Miranda for the first time. He hears Flint say they're dead to her. And we see in the flashback, you know, the little flashback, Flint and Miranda have a little hug, you know, which is an emotional little moment now. It's really short, you know, it's only a few seconds. But you can see a lot of emotion in that hug, and obviously, again, we know what it was all for, and kind of a bit of a revenge. You know, it would have been his first port of call to do after everything went down. Morley realised, you know, it was never about treasure, it was an execution. He says men died on a personal vendetta for her. He warns Billy that men will die for some hidden agenda, the Barlow woman's agenda. He says, mark my words, Billy, it's all happening again. The writers are really setting distrust in Miranda at this point, you know, and Flint as well, but Miranda especially, I think. I was very suspicious of her first watch, and I think they're deliberately doing that. Obviously now, I feel nothing kind of but sadness and for her, but it's just so much mystery about her and about their relationship being set up here. So then, speaking of, we cut to, just the most uncomfortable, depressing, like, sex scene ever. It's almost like, why? He asked, why are they bothering? Like, is it to keep up appearances with Mr. Guthrie there? Is it something they just try and do every so often just to feel something? I don't know, because bizarre, and I'm unsure about it now with hindsight. I think it's, maybe just two lonely, broken people almost, just maybe looking for a connection, and physically, it's just not there. It's just, there's nothing there. Flint's just not present, and it's just awkward, uncomfortable, terrible sex. So afterwards, they're getting dressed now, and things are still a bit cold with Flint. She says if he's upset, she'd appreciate him just saying it. And he says angrily, a whole shelf full of books, why did you have to read in that one? She says she is no longer willing to bury it on a shelf and pretend it has no meaning for her. She says that book is something I shared with Thomas. So maybe the writers didn't know exactly what they were going to do with the book. They knew they were going to have this book, but they didn't know exactly what they were going to do, because it's probably more Thomas and Flint's book, isn't it, really, more than hers and Thomas's. You can get away with it still without it being a plot hole or anything like that. We cut back to the painting. Flint has a little look at it, and we are now able to confirm now with all this information we've just got that she was married to a man named Thomas, who is now dead. You know, again, according to all this information. And she says she misses their life when he was alive. She can feel herself forgetting it, and she doesn't want to. That this life they're living now doesn't really feel like living anymore. She says some part of you must feel it too. And now a bit gentler, you know, maybe understanding a bit more where she's coming from. You know, Flint takes her face and says things will get better. Now he promises it. He kisses her forehead tenderly and leaves. This is probably their most tender moment we've seen them share yet. The first time you're like, there is something there between these two. There is some love there, in obviously complete contrast to that sex scene we just saw. Okay, so now we are back at Vane's camp, at Ranger Crew camp, and yeah, we learn it's been about a week since he lost his ship, since all that fallout. Vane's a mess. He's an absolute mess. He's bruised, he's barely coherent. Jack comes in the tent and scolds him for picking fights while he's out there just trying to get things right, trying to get things in order for them. He discovers Vane's been smoking opium now, you know, we see the pipe. He says despite Miss Guthrie's blow, they still have 8 loyal men, his wits and an unshakable captain. You know, he's doing his best to talk him up, to prop him up, and to keep on the positive side of a pretty shit situation right now. He says he'll do his best to get everything in order, but when the time comes, they will need their captain. And he says, see what you can do about finding him. We get, you know, Vane kind of does a moment where it looks like he might be about to say something insightful. He kind of does this, Jack leans in, and we just get our first, fuck you, Jack. And it's just, oh man, Vane, come on, get your shit together. Poor Jack leaves, you know, he's again, I don't blame Jack, he's done everything kind of right, really, up until now. Oh, obviously he dropped the pearls, but aside from that, he's done everything right. And yeah, he leaves, and we see Vane have a kind of vision, hallucination of a pretty intimidating looking fellow that just makes him reach straight for the booze. So our next scene, we have Scott and Hornigold chatting. I think he's loading barrels or doing something like that. Scott's defending Eleanor, you know, obviously rumours got round of what happened. Says it was an isolated incident, no cause for concern. Hornigold remarks that she humiliated one of the island's strongest earners. Says men are asking who's next to lose their livelihood because they crossed her on the wrong day. Their concerns are valid. He's got a point. Eleanor is not reliable. He says to Scott to get in control of her before it's too late. Both Mr. Scott and Jack, you know, are taking the brunt of this fallout. Someone comes in and says the Andromache's sails have been spotted, which is Bryson's ship. So we continue with that, and Scott tells Eleanor Captain Bryson is close. She asks what did Hornigold want, you know, so she obviously saw him come in, or she knows he's been about. From Scott's silence, you know, she can sort of work it out. She says fuck Hornigold, fuck the captains, and fuck anyone who doesn't like the way I manage this place. Eleanor, there's no backtracking by Eleanor. She's sticking to her guns, pun kind of intended. Yeah, she's happy. She's not ready to kind of deepen it further. Scott gently warns her about what she is about to attempt with Bryson is very risky. Says if he won't cooperate, they can't try and detain him in any way. If she makes a move against Bryson or his ship, she'll be making a move against Guthrie Trading Company, as the ship belongs to her grandfather in Boston. Says no one would be able to protect her from the consequences. If Bryson walks, we must let him go, he says. She asks about the guns Flint needs, and he says they'll find them some other way. Says he never asks anything of her, but this he must insist on. You know, really good little scene and insight into her and Scott's relationship. We obviously, we will learn Scott's got this whole other life, but it's clear to see he does have a lot of love for Eleanor, and he is looking out for her, and we see that very clearly in this episode, and we see, you know, that will get taken advantage of a little bit later. Yeah, she says she understands, but it's not entirely convincing, and I think maybe even Scott knows it, I think. We are back to the careening, you know, everyone's hard at work. Flint rides in on his, you know, black horse. We hear a crewmate playing Parson's Revenge, which is a really one of my not one of my favourite musical piece from all of Black Sails. I love that piece of music. And yeah, more just great. We get our first really great visuals of the ship. You know, it's obviously tilted in the distance and they're just doing some work on it. De Groot seems in better spirits when Flint asks how it's going. You know, he says they're ahead of schedule. Says Billy's done well and kept them working well. And, you know, we see Billy kind of just getting things in order in the background. And yeah, you know, I see you, Tom Hopper. I see you looking good shirtless there, son. It's noted. De Groot says he's never seen a crew work this fast and this hard. And yeah, I never really appreciated before just how well respected and liked Billy was, you know, from this early on. I know he gets it again in season 4, obviously different reasons. But yeah, he's really he's loved. Flint overhears a crew member yelling at Silver about the pig being rotten, and everyone now has the squits. Yeah, and that is the same crew member we will see a couple of seasons later with a very different kind of relationship with Silver and some very dire consequences. So Flint covers for Silver. He tastes the pig, you know, says, yeah, it's delicious, must just be a thing going around. And then as soon as the crew member's out of sight, he spits it out and he's like, what the fuck did you do to that pig? Or he says something like that. He says to go and get another pig and do exactly what he says. So he already knows that Silver's cover story about being a cook was absolutely crap. They both kind of know each other now and know what they're about. And this episode is really kind of both of them, especially Silver, kind of feeling that out a bit with Flint and seeing what he can get away with a bit more. He's getting a bit more risky, a bit braver. So yeah, it's their relationship is definitely kind of going up a level. So now we're back at Vane's camp and we are in Max's little tent she's been given. She looks to have a little bit of control back, you know, when we come to see her. She's made a dress out of an old sail, you know, she's kind of just shifted it and made it kind of look presentable. She's using like a fork to comb her hair. She's doing her best to kind of keep herself nice. She's not where she wants to be. Yeah, she's seemingly, you know, she's there with a guy and she's just talking about pleasure. She's trying to get the guys, I think, to be a bit gentler with her and just using feminine wilds and using what she knows just to maybe give herself an easier time, keep herself out of the danger zone. She's like, essentially, she's doing her best in a really shit situation, isn't she? She's just doing what she can, doing what she knows, just to make life a little bit more bearable for herself, I think. And so the man she was just with is very happy, and he's reporting his encounter to the other guys outside the tent. Obviously Singleton is there, talking about pleasure and sort of things that obviously Max has told him. Pleasure doesn't just mean straight up smashing sex, you know, obviously is what she's going with. And yeah, Singleton just doesn't like that. You can just tell he can't stand that Max has turned this situation around a little bit, and he's just an awful, horrible guy, isn't he? So he enters Max's tent, and yeah, she's visually scared of him. She knows he's the danger man. She says if pleasure is what he wants, she can give it to him if he lets her. And yeah, he responds by just smacking her around the face. Is it episode 6 yet? Can we skip? Can we go to episode 6 already, please? Get rid of this guy, Anne, please. And we cut to Max's cry outside the tent. You know, thankfully we don't have to see it all again, but sometimes it's, you know, even worse just hearing it. And yeah, we are not the only ones struggling to listen to poor Max's ordeal. We get a great shot of Anne, who, again, you know, is still clearly having a hard time being around all this. But that shock and that kind of PTSD, I think, from the last episode seems to have been replaced by anger this time. And yeah, we get our first, I think, proper look at Anne's actual face. It's simmering a bit now. She's getting that anger now. So Eleanor meets Bryson at the beach. It's civil. They've obviously met before, but it's not warm. You know, he's in a rush. She tells him one of her crew means to hunt the Urca de Lima, and Bryson inquires if her father has given this the go-ahead. She says, why don't you ask him yourself? And tells him he'll be in the tavern shortly. And we cut to Miranda's, and Scott is dressing Mr. Guthrie. And Mr. Guthrie, yeah, you know, I've already said, even though he's hardly featured yet, he he's a sly mofo in this episode. He's doing that thing, like he's talking to Miranda. Scott's dressing him. He's talking to Miranda, and Miranda isn't really impressed with this, either, as well as I am. He's doing that thing where he's kind of talking about someone, and that someone is there, and it's obviously Scott, and it's obviously so condescending anyway, and so demeaning, because Scott obviously is his slave at this point. So yeah, he's talking about Scott to Miranda. We learn a little bit, that Scott was his personal houseboy until he proved himself worthy of greater responsibility. Just so condescending, hate him. So they gave him an education, which he passed on to Eleanor, to which Richard says, "Look where that got me." So yeah, he's deliberately trying to humiliate and berate Scott a little bit here, I think, isn't he? Miranda says she still doesn't follow. Again, I don't think she's totally impressed, and she doesn't understand what's going on and what he's trying to tell her. He explains about Bryson's ship and Eleanor needing the guns to arm Captain Flint for the Urca. He's smarmy about Eleanor asking for his help. Yeah, Miranda asks how can Eleanor be sure he won't betray her and alert Bryson of his arrest, and points are made. She's right. He says whatever resentment he feels towards Eleanor and Flint, he must put it aside. It's not convincing. It's just, not convincing. Even first watch, you get a feel, something's going on here. I'm not convinced about this. He puts on his ridiculous wig, and he's ready to go. So we get a little scene, they're still working on the Walrus and cleaning it, careening it. And two of the crew members are tying rope to a palm tree, to a type of tree. And Billy passes by and tells them it's the wrong tree. And they say, does it matter? And he says, yes, it does. Fix it. And then he goes off to deal with something else. One of these guys is the fuck tent guy from earlier, So we already know where his mind is, and it's just not on the business at hand. The other guy sort of says, does it matter, really? And they head straight to the fuck tent, and they do not do as Billy said, and they leave it. And obviously, that will play a part, and it's obvious that's going to play a part. So now we get a very little Morley and Randall moment. Randall has found himself a cat called Betsy. And they have a little quick scene. Randall asks Morley about a barnacle. I think it was promised. For whatever reason. And Morley seems to be looking out for Randall. Straight away he doesn't like, oh, for God's sake, or I'll do it later. Or he doesn't belittle him or anything. He's like, I did, didn't I? I did promise you that thing. So he just goes straight back out. So yeah, but on his way out, he barges past Billy. Billy asks him what his problem is. Morley's angry that Billy didn't raise his hand to question the captain's plan. He says when Gates stepped aside, he'd hoped they might have got a quartermaster that wasn't in Flint's pockets. Yeah, Billy seems a little bit kind of stumped and dejected by that, and a little bit disappointed maybe in himself, and we will find out again in a little bit why he didn't confront Flint and question it maybe a bit more when he knew he probably should have. And yeah, again, Silver has been watching this, and he goes straight to Flint. He makes a bit of small talk about how Flint knows how to cook a pig or something like that, and Flint says, why do you care? And he says, I don't really, but I think a bit of small talk might ease the conversation in. And then he says, what are we going to do about Billy? He says he appears to be straining at the seams. And yeah, he's not entirely wrong. And when he goes to say kind of we again, Flint stops him and says, there is no we, get this right. There's no we. He gives Billy Bones his props, and he says he's dutiful and has respect from the crew and himself. He says, I trust him 1,000 times more than I would a rodent like yourself. Silver, he's not ready to call it quits though. He's getting a little bit braver, like I say. Silver says he saw Billy and Morley talking late at night in secret. Silver says, trust me, I'm purely in this for myself and you know this. I've no reason to tell you anything other than the truth. Both our futures depend on this. And he's just laying it all out now with Flint. Flint quickly says, I haven't even decided yet if you have a future. But I can tell you this. Try and play me against my own crew will not help your cause. And that's the end of that conversation for Flint. By this point, I think Flint and Silver had each other quite well made. Like I say, they kind of know where they're at with each other, at least at this point. And Silver knows their interests match. So he's not putting up much of an act anymore. He's just kind of saying what needs to be said to get Flint on side. Yeah, and the wind picks up a bit, and we can see the group, he's looking a bit concerned, and we see that same tree kind of struggling at the base a little bit. So we are back now. I think we're in kind of the market area, and Jack's trying to convince someone, just another crew member from another crew, I guess, to sell something to Mr. Guthrie on his behalf, kind of for a share. But the guy's, having none of it. Knows the risk it puts his own crew in, so he refuses. Says to Jack, if it's not you she has a problem with, why stick with him? And then we hear Anne say, it's a good question, and then we cut to the both of them walking out of the tent along the street. Anne says there are other ships, and Jack sort of changes the subject of Vane. I don't think he likes kind of bad-mouthing him too much. There is obviously a lot of respect there. And he asks her if she's had any offers, and she looks away. So, yeah, she clearly has. And, yeah, he props her up a bit. He says she'd be an asset to any crew, whereas no one's going to be coming his way for offers. Says his only asset is his wits, but due to the pearls, losing the pearls, they're kind of ill-valued at the moment. The only task he'd get is swapping out the piss buckets, and he says, that, my darling, I feel compelled to state out loud, life is simply too fucking short. Oh, I love Jack in this scene. Anne sort of gives him a look, and he kind of asks if she's angry with him too. That's kind of cut short when Noonan, who's heard him, yelling, comes out and having a go at him. He wants a word. Jack, I love him, but he is also a bit of an arsehole. He says, I prefer if you make an appointment. Quite a busy day ahead. But yeah, Noonan's, having none of it. He wants to have it out, but some, fun little Jack moments in this scene. Noonan is not happy that Max is with their crew. Says it's costing him money, he's losing out, Max is a good earner, yada yada. Jack says it's a debt being paid, nothing more, no disrespect, basically, he's saying. And Noonan calls BS. And Jack says he believes they're at an impasse. And Noonan kind of has a confused face at that. And which Jack goes into a further, longer, harder explanation of what that means. And to that, Noonan cuts in short and we get our second, fuck you, Jack, of the episode. And then he says, give me back my whore. Then Anne speaks for the first time to someone who isn't Jack. She says, you take her back yourself if you had the balls. And, I think that's quite smart on Anne. Jack sort of gives her a look. I think that's her trying to sort the issue for Max without, needing to do it herself, which she'll obviously resort to eventually. But reverse psychology on Noonan to make him take action, and that way he can sort it, get Max out, and problem solved, and she doesn't have to listen to it anymore, and maybe deal with the kind of guilt she has. So yeah, Noonan kind of storms off. Once Noonan walks off, Jack asks Anne if she has an issue with them holding on to that whore. Anne doesn't say anything, but Jack continues, she's the only thing keeping the remaining crew at their side. And Anne gives Jack his third, she doesn't say Jack, but she says fuck you. So she gives him his third fuck you of the episode, and she storms off. It's quite hard to read that fuck you, I think, on first watch. I think maybe there's a bit of her being pissed that Jack is oblivious to why, as a woman, she might be upset with what's going on. Obviously now with hindsight, him knowing full well her past and her history as to why she might be upset and not happy with what is going down. Yeah, and there may also be the factor that she might be feeling some things now by this point, and is maybe another reason why she's struggling with it, and she doesn't know what to do with that, and she's kind of taking it out on Jack. But yeah, I do think for the most part it is just to show us that, even though we've seen her be nothing but kind of brutal so far, and we haven't really seen her as kind of a woman yet, and how that kind of affects her being the only female pirate on an all-male crew, and I think this is our first little insight into that. And so she's probably angry that Jack's just not understanding that, because he is kind of oblivious to that sort of stuff when it comes to Anne just being a woman and her kind of needs and things like that. We'll see that throughout. It's definitely our best insight so far into their relationship and kind of that dynamic. So yeah, really interesting little scene. So now we have the meeting with Bryson at Eleanor's. The question's been laid out to him, to Bryson. He asks Mr. Guthrie if he's lost his mind. Says his father will never approve. Mr. Guthrie says the Prophet will stop any repercussions on that front. Bryson knows about the Scarborough. It's docked close by. He comments Mr. Guthrie wasn't at his home. He was planning on selling him some slaves. I hate both these men with a passion. Asks if this is connected. Mr. Guthrie plays it kind of cool, to be fair with him at this point, and Bryson says he wants to speak to him alone. Obviously, Eleanor's not happy with that, but Mr. Guthrie assures her. Again, I hate him, but he's playing everyone really well in this episode, to give it to him on that front. Outside the doors now, Scott reassures her that her father can handle it and will get the guns. Eleanor's not convinced. We see sort of 2 or 3 armed men, hands on blades, in the tavern, and Scott is hurt. She says to him she couldn't leave it to chance, and we go back inside the room. Bryson says, let's be frank, we both know the low regard your family holds on to you. He's worked out things have gone wrong on the island, and they're scrambling a little bit. And then Mr. Guthrie says, let me tell you how wrong you are. And then we cut back. Eleanor apologises to Scott, but he's hurt that she's lied to her after everything they've been through, after their conversation earlier. Bryson exits the room, and, there's a little bit of tension where you're not sure what's going to happen. Has he said yes? Has he said no? But he tells her the guns are hers. Eleanor breathes a sigh of relief. So now we get Mr. Guthrie and Mr. Scott walking through the market. They're obviously walking back to Miranda's, I assume. He remarks that Mr. Scott should be proud with what him and Eleanor have achieved here. Again, he's doing that thing where he's kind of talking him up, but at the same time he's kind of throwing in a bit of shade as well. Yeah, Mr. Scott is understandably a bit cold with him. Maybe he kind of already knows what's going on and that it might not all be what it seems. Richard says she'll get herself killed if she proceeds with his Spanish galleon business. Whether by Spanish sword or English noose. It's inevitable, and that Mr. Scott knows it. Damn if that's not some Eleanor foreshadowing. Yep, that's... I mean, she gets away with a noose, but... You want to be angry at him for it, but he's not wrong. He is not wrong. Scott asks him what he said to keep Bryson in that room. And he says he has a plan to calm his insanity and deal with what happens next. Mr. Guthrie says he doesn't envy him, as she'll stop at nothing to save the island, a place where they both matter. He says to Mr. Scott, in his heart, he knows the truth. And, this is what I mentioned earlier. He's using Mr. Scott's love for Eleanor, his loyalty to kind of manipulate him in this moment. And how dare he use, Scott's love and loyalty for Eleanor to ultimately help betray her, while also knowing full well he's made him, Mr. Scott, a part of this deal with Bryson as well, and he's going to sell him down the river pretty much as well. Just, yeah, absolutely, it's kind of well played, Mr. Guthrie, but fuck you. Big fuck you. We get a very short little scene with Miranda. She's doing some gardening, a local child kind of throws some mud or a stone at her, calls her a witch. Just a little scene, just kind of, re-establishing she's out of place and pretty alone on this island, pretty much building up to this kind of final scene with her and Mr. Guthrie. Eleanor visits Flint, tells him the guns are his. So they toast to celebrate. He senses she's a bit down, and she tells him she had to betray Mr. Scott's confidence, to get this done. Flint says nobody will believe it's possible until they show them, but when that day comes, they'll say it was inevitable. He's speaking for himself a bit there as well, of course. So the crew are working underneath the Walrus. They're still cleaning and doing what they need to do. The wind's raging again, and the tree finally gives way. There's just a mad panic to get everyone out the way, and Randall kind of spots his cat just chilling, like cats do, and he goes back for it, obviously, and the boat is just ready to fall back on its side sort of thing. We see the ship keeling over, and we hear Randall yelling, and Morley runs straight away to help him. Again, yeah, Morley, I I get him a little bit more on this rewatch. I kind of take a bit more note of him than I did. He's not quite the annoying in the way guy. You know, he's reacting like someone would react that has suspicions. But ultimately, he seems like he's a good guy. You know, he's the first to run out. Again, he's got this little friendship with Randall. And Billy goes as well, pretty much immediately to go. But Flint says he'll go. You know, and this leaves the viewer with just more conflicting questions about Flint. One minute he seems to not give a shit about the crew, first episode and things we've seen. And now he's risking his life to save arguably the most useless, you know. And so they're by the underneath now, and Randall's got his legs stuck. And the cat kind of cats and just casually walks out. So you're like, all right, well, the cat's all right. Morley and Flint work together to try and dig him out, because he's obviously stuck now. The group tells Billy there's no time left, you know, so they're all still trying to hold on. But he's just holding out, cutting the lines as long as he can. It's looking hopeless at the scene. And then we see just like a meat cleaver thrown down, the same one that Silver has been using. And we see it's Silver that's put it down in front of Flint, and with the idea, and obviously it's very ironic that he is the one ultimately suggesting that they cut off Randall's leg, because obviously Long John Silver is very well known just all over. Even if you don't know, you know, where this story would go, most people know John Silver kind of has a peg leg. And then we get great cuts, you know, kind of between Randall's leg being chopped off, but we don't see it all in too gruesome detail, and the ropes being cut. The ship is back upright. I think it's taken some damage, but it's better than what it would have been if they'd left it. And the crew wait to see who emerges. After a bit of tension, Flint emerges, you know, carrying a worse for wear Randall. And straight away, you know, Billy goes to see what happened to Morley. And he sees that he is crushed under the weight. And on first watch, you know, I didn't really understand what just happened. I wasn't sure. Had Flint done something? Had Flint, you know, got a kill in there? But I think Billy's having the same suspicions. It's like, well, this is convenient. The one guy, you know, that was really kind of speaking up against Flint, and now he's dead. No one's seen it. We just kind of, you know he went there and now he's not. So, yeah, it was a little bit confusing on a first watch. But I generally think we probably would have seen it if something bad had gone down. And yeah, he just got stuck. And unfortunately, there was just not enough time for Flint to get him out. But maybe if there was, maybe that's when you ask the question, would he have? But we'll never know. So yeah, it's a little bit later on, and Gates comes and sits down next to Billy, you know, who's kind of looking out to sea, looking a bit pensive and kind of taken in by it all. Gates reassures him he did everything he could. And, you know, this is where Gates calls him son, which is always a nice touching little moment. I really love their relationship, you know, their kind of friendship and bond. Billy again scolds himself for not having it out with Flint a bit more. Gates kind of gives him a little gentle warning, like, careful, Billy. You know, I think he knows that Billy's just deepening this whole Flint business a bit too much, and that it's maybe not the best idea. Billy scorns himself, you know, for rushing Flint's plan through when he knew better. And again, Gates reassures him, you know, this is where Billy admits that he is afraid of Flint. And Gates says nothing, but I think there is a little understanding there, I think. I think maybe he can relate to that a little bit. Maybe. It's never made completely clear, but you know, he is a bit braver in front of Flint, we'll see in later episodes. But I think that's only when, you know, in relation to what's going to happen to Billy in a couple of episodes, I think that's only when he kind of plucks up the courage and enough Dutch courage to finally have it out with Flint a little bit. But yeah, you know, that's an interesting little moment. So we see Flint watching the both of them kind of talking. And he approaches Silver and he asks him what Billy and Morley were talking about that night. And Silver says he didn't hear much, but he heard Mrs. Barlow's name mentioned. And now Billy is now on Flint's radar, I think. Okay, so now we're back at Miranda's. She's playing her harpsichord again. Scott and Mr. Guthrie enter. I think then Scott goes to do something Well, we'll see what he's going to do in a minute. She helps Mr. Guthrie remove his coat, and they talk a little bit about the piece of music she was just playing. He says it's a sad piece of music, and understanding her circumstances, he can understand its appeal. Again, he's being sly. He's finding something to give him an in, with Miranda this time emotionally. He's already done it with Scott. Now he's kind of doing it with Miranda. She questions what circumstances, and he says, truthfully, I might know everything, Mrs. Hamilton, and tells her not to be alarmed. He has no intention of outing her. And now we are just given kind of a lot more second-hand information about Miranda and her past with Flint. We learn Thomas Hamilton's father was Lord Proprietor of the Bahama Islands. Says he knew the Earl and he told him the tragedy that befell his son. Basically says she, Miranda, was known to be the cheating sort and began a torrid affair with Thomas's closest friend and promising young officer in Her Majesty's Navy. Upon discovering the affair, Thomas went mad with grief, and he kind of implies he killed himself in the asylum. And in shame, her and Flint fled. And Mr. Guthrie says he wants to help her. Says her exile has probably been less than ideal, and says maybe it's time she was offered a hand and returned to civilization. She's listening. She's now listening a little bit to him, and he's got her ear now. But she says, how could he possibly offer that, And he says in Boston, with his family's help, she could start again with a clean slate. And she asks, why would you help us? He says he knows what it's like to be judged unfairly. Yeah, all right, Mr. Guthrie. And that they might be able to help each other. Interesting scene, pretty sure he doesn't know the Flint and Thomas part of everything when he says, I might know everything. I don't think you know that. But otherwise, he's read the situation pretty well. Which again just ties in with me saying how risky it was for her last episode, just giving him the book and, giving him just that big piece of information. And now with everything he's kind of pieced together, he's using it to his advantage with the plans he's made with Bryson. Because, obviously we'll see a little bit more as well from this kind of scene, what then goes on and what their conversation entails with him and Miranda. Okay, so now we're back to Vane. He's still laying in his tent, feeling sorry for himself. And we see, he's clearly having another vision. In his vision, it's Eleanor standing over him. He's literally trying to hold back tears, pretty much. I don't know. It's not pathetic. I don't want to say it's pathetic. He's not the Vane we know and love at this point. He's very dejected and feeling sorry for himself, Vane. There's a little bit of kind of exposition going on here. A little bit of stuff we kind of already know. This scene is it's a bit of a fluff scene for me, to be honest with you. I don't think it needed to be quite as long as what it was. But we're just basically seeing he's a mess over her. She says he could take it all back, take the whole island from her. And she says, you know exactly what it is you need to do and where you need to go to do it. She's caressing a specific scar, we've sort of honed in on a couple of times in this episode. So we focus on that a bit, and we'll get obviously a little bit more about that soon. And then her voice kind of morphs into the scary dude from earlier. And it says, if only you wasn't so goddamn afraid. And that snaps him awake, and then he sees him again, outside. And he kind of follows this vision of this great big hunk of man through the streets. The vision disappears, and Vane is confronted by Noonan and a couple of his men. They beat him up a bit. Noonan asks him if he's going to give him back Max, and Vane, in answer, proceeds to projectile vomit all over his shoes. And pissed off, Noonan just says, fuck it, put him out of his misery, boys. And the pistol is pointed at his head, and Vane doesn't even try and fight it. He's just ready to kind of accept it at this point. And it seems to be only when the pistol doesn't work. They were renowned for being a bit dodgy and not completely reliable. And that's only when he there's a beat, and that's when he's like, right. And something inside of him snaps, and he fights. And he wrecks him. And Noonan's, basically pleading for his life. He snaps his neck under his boot. And that is the end of Noonan. Lovely little brothel owner. Actually, you know what? You don't see a lot of him, but I thought he was quite funny, and he had a funny delivery in his lines. But not a good brothel owner. Not a nice man, ultimately. So, we're not going to mourn that one much. But ultimately, yeah, that does mean that Anne's kind of little plan is scarpered and Max may be stuck for a little longer in her situation. So now we have a scene. I don't fully understand why. I don't know why Pastor Lambrick... His name is Pastor Lambrick. What did I called him Pastor Limbrick last episode. He's brought into Miranda's house to speak to Richard. On watching this, I didn't remember this scene at all. I must have just, boring scene, whatever. I must not have taken much notice of it. Yeah, and the pastor's not a fan of Richard Guthrie. He says he's the reason this island is infested with criminals. And he says God teaches not to cheer when others stumble, but in his case, he may ask for his forgiveness. And, this phony, again, is added to my shit list for this episode. I do not like this guy much either. And Mr. Guthrie asks him what God says about redemption. And he's basically saying from tonight, he wants to right some wrongs. Again, I'm not sure why the pastor needs to be there, what he can really do for everything. My only guess is he's been brought here by request of Miranda. They've obviously had a conversation now in between what we just saw and just talked about and this that we haven't seen. And I guess maybe she's kind of said, look, he's on my back a little bit. Can you just get him off my back a bit, maybe? I guess maybe that's what's going on. Otherwise, I don't know why he's there. I'm not sure. Anyone can let me know what's really going on with this scene, then let me know, because I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, the best I can come up with is Miranda's requested it just to get a little bit of leeway with him, because she knows he's been suspicious of them. So maybe, but I don't know. But maybe I've forgotten something that will happen in a couple more episodes, so maybe that'll be explained when I watch it. Yeah, we cut to Scott at the docks. This is at night now. He joins Eleanor's lookout, and they watch Bryson rowing in with a couple of other men. The lookout makes it clear Bryson is a little bit later than was planned. He's a little bit kind of concerned about it. Mr. Scott doesn't look too happy. Their plans are seemingly coming together, but he's looking conflicted. But obviously that is because we will now see him and Mr. Guthrie have made their own plan. And he knocks the lookout out. And we cut back, and Mr. Guthrie says to the pastor he will see it that the thieves will be cast from this place soon and for good. And then we see Flint, Gates and Eleanor watching Bryson's ship leave him. Gates remarks, he says she's I can't remember, she's sailing low, or he says something like that, and that the guns are still on board. And they work out that they have been betrayed. Yeah, Eleanor says, what are we going to do? And Flint says, through gritted, determined teeth, get them back. And then that is the end of episode 4.
Last item.
An episode loaded with background information. We learn a lot about Mr. Guthrie, about Mr. Scott and his past with the Guthrie family, and his relationship with Eleanor is explored a bit more. We are given a couple of second-hand accounts about Mrs. Barlow and her past with Flint. Again, while more information is being given, so many more questions come to mind. The Billy and Flint tension continues to build, and we lose a Walrus crew member in Morley, a man I understand a lot more this time around. We see the fallout in Vane's camp. He's not in a good way, and Jack's feeling the pressure of trying to hold everything together. We get our best insight yet into his and Anne's relationship, and learn Anne is struggling with Max's situation, which again leads me to making the point some shithousery went on in this episode from most of the characters I can't stand. Mr. Guthrie himself, I'm doing MVPs, I'm awarding kind of positive, but if I was doing shithousery, he would absolutely win this episode. I do think this episode had the strongest filler vibe to it, just a little bit more fluff than necessarily I think going on. But thankfully I think a lot more as well than we'll ever see again. Again, this episode, it flows fine in a binge watch, but maybe not the most gripping when we're going into a deep dive. I'm going to dip this rating back down just a little bit to a 7.6. Okay, so MVP. Yeah, again, so many shithouses this episode. I could do that one. That would be the hard one to do. The Walrus ship itself was in contention. Again, just our first proper look at her. Lots of great sounds, lots of creaking. We get to see her in the distance. But yeah, obviously I'm not going to give the MVP to a ship. I'm going to give Billy some love this time around. He gets a promotion to quartermaster earlier on and settles into the role well. We really see, you know, how well loved he is and how well respected he is. It's not his fault the 2 crewmates disobeyed his orders. It's easy to get frustrated with him and his hesitation in confronting Flint. But if you put yourself in his shoes, it's so much more easier to sympathise with him. I know I'll be taking this mild and timid Billy for granted in Season 4 when I'll just be getting mad at him and going, Billy! So yeah, I'm going to make the most of it now. I also think it takes a very brave and smart man to be able to admit he's scared of someone in front of another man as well, especially. So yeah, Billy Bones is off the mark and he gets his first MVP of the series. Okay, so best scene and quote. You know, honestly, nothing stuck out massively on both. A lot of good and interesting stuff happening, you know, that we've gone over. You know, and quotes-wise, some info given, some good info with a few little quips. But no real bars or anything massively impactful for me. I like Flint calling Silver a rodent, and Silver just straight up giving Flint the tea and saying, trust me, I'm purely in this for myself and you know this. But I think I'll go with the triple hit. Almost a triple hit of fuck you, Jack. I know Anne doesn't add the Jack. So yeah, I'll go with the best quote. Let's give the fuck you, Jack its little moment. And for my favourite scene, I'm going to tie that in a bit with our first real bit of insight into Anne and Jack's relationship and their dynamic. You know, and Noonan giving Jack a hard time and all that sort of stuff. And Anne calling Noonan out in order to maybe get him to help Max out. Some fun Jack moments in there, and yeah, a bit more insight into Anne and their relationship. So yeah, that is probably my best scene. And that is episode 4 of season 1. Thought maybe this was where things start going up and amp, but it's the next episode, isn't it? It's the next episode where, you know, the quality starts to rise more. I think we've got some good kind of filler and exposition and a lot of questions, a lot of kind of mysteries being set up. It almost, you know, this episode, like I said, I called it careening. It almost is a little bit like we saw the show, we got the show in the first episode, and we've kind of tipped it on its side a bit the last 3 episodes, and just kind of had a bit of a closer look at things, but nothing's really... Things have been going on, you know, there's been things being set up, but now we've tipped her up right, we're getting her on the sea, and we're really going to see some things happen, I think, is pretty much the way I kind of take it. So, yeah, I'm super excited now to get fully into the second half of the season. And, yeah, where I really think the show goes up a notch and really picks up its pace and gets going. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a good week, and I will catch you next week sometime for episode 5. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Peace out. Bye.